I used to write haiku as a child, so yes.
All right. Well, let's see where this goes. Let's start with Tucker. Joe and Kamala. 2 sentences.
Lovely couple on their way out.
Jordan. Christian, Christia, and Justin. And you can think about this one.
A little narcissistic for my liking.
We got a lot of this. We're going to have some fun here. Donald Trump.
I'll speak in sentences. Orange, ascendant. No, I would say, if you want to know who Trump is, watch the reaction to Trump. I mean, that's really it. I think Trump is politically immoderate. And I think that not because I'm totally crazy. I think I'm pretty moderate too, to be honest. I don't want radical change. But neither does Trump. And they're treating him like he's a Nazi, and that says everything about them.
Loud and clear. Jordan. Pierre Poilievre, or Poilievre if you wish.
I'll tell you a quick story about Mr. Poilievre, a couple of sentences. I met him at the residence of the opposition, and I met his wife, who I thought was a very solid person. And one of the concerns they expressed to my wife and I while I was there was the expense that they had racked up at the expense of the Canadian taxpayer for moving them into Stornoway, into the residence. And I thought 2 things. I thought, all things considered, you probably have more important things to prioritize. But the fact that that actually bothers you and that that was genuine and unprompted is a good sign, because I don't think that Pierre Poilievre thinks that your money is his. Well, yeah, or that he knows what to do with it more than you do. Right.
Tucker. Vivek Ramaswamy. He wants to build a wall between Canada and the U.S. Any thoughts on that?
Building a wall between Canada and the U.S. would be the best thing that ever happened in Canada. Not because the U.S. is bad, but because it's too easy for your creative talent and your economic producers to flee when things get bad here. And there should be a wall around Canada. And smart Canadians, if they stayed, and a lot have stayed, of course, but you've lost a lot of great people, and I know them because they live in my country. And I'm in the creative business. My business is filled with Canadians. And I always say, like, why couldn't you do it in Canada? Because it's state media. You know, no creativity allowed, only racist, tranny, climate. That's it. And so I think it would be great for Canada. I mean that.
We'll try not to make the wall too high. Jordan, the Freedom Convoy. It's been an interesting... Whoa. Sit down. We got some conversation to come. It's been an interesting 24 hours.
So you know that the trucker convoy was part, and also part of the leadership of, a much broader movement of working class people all across the Western world. You're seeing that more particularly in Europe now. There were some 200,000 German farmers and assorted protesters out over the last couple of weeks. You saw very little coverage of that. The same thing is happening in Spain, it's happening in France, it's happening in Scotland. And part of the reason that it is happening is because working class people, in their implicit wisdom, have decided that they're not the problem that faces the planet, but the solution. And the truckers knew that, and they served in that function, as even Trudeau admitted not so long prior to his unforgivable, traitorous, and now deemed criminal activities, which should be treated as such.
Yep.
I thought from the beginning, you know, more power to the truckers. I think they handled that demonstration impeccably. They timed it brilliantly. They left at the right time. They did nothing but good. And they were treated like Russian collaborators and MAGA scum, and sometimes both at the same time, because that's exactly how demented Canada is. So more power to them, and thank God for the wisdom of the federal court.
May I just add one thing? I so fervently agree with what Jordan just said, and I was mesmerized by that whole thing, and I know some of the people involved. I do think, though, there's probably too much emphasis, relatively speaking, on the Prime Minister and not enough on Chrystia Freeland, who I knew as a journalist working in Washington 20 years ago. She was at the Financial Times. And the fact that someone like that could ascend to a position of high authority in a civilized country like this is such a shocking, and I mean that. First of all, it proves the meritocracy is fake. If some, mentally
random.
deficient fascist can have power over you, okay? But watching David Menzies get arrested recently for trying to ask her a question, I mean, I really feel like people need to be very direct. No, this person has no moral authority over me at all. She is not qualified to even speak to me.
Okay. Those were extremely long 2 sentences, but let's keep rolling.
But heartfelt.
Yeah, no, you guys are the right guys. I mean, I never expected you to just follow the.
I obeyed
follow the line.
initially.
Yeah, bullshit. Tucker, January 6th.
Well, January 6th was fraudulent, and it's taken me 3 years to get the full picture on that. I had that instinct. I'll just say there's nothing I can add to January 6th, which is an enormously complex series of events that still to this day is shrouded in secrecy and deception. And I know a lot about this subject. I'm from Washington. But I would just say one thing really quick. I watched that happen. I was not in Washington when it happened. I saw it on television. One of my children worked in that building, called me and said this was happening. And I instantly knew there was lying. I had no idea where it was coming from. Here's all I would say about it. If something happens in your country or in your life and your gut tells you there's something wrong with the explanation I'm getting, trust your gut. It doesn't mean that you understand what actually happened. I still don't understand what actually happened. It was a setup. I can say that conclusively. Who did it? Hard to know. The left did it, but who? But I knew right away that what they were telling me on NBC News and CNN and all the rest of the liars in my country was false. I could feel it, and I never wavered in my belief that they were lying to me, and now we know for a fact it's been documented that they were. So my advice to you would be, if you feel something is deceptive, you were given these instincts at birth. There's nothing more reliable than your intuition. It's not trying to sell you anything. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to save you. So don't ignore it.
Thank you. Jordan, the World Economic Forum. And you got three sentences.
Well, the first thing I would say is that one of the things I've learned very deeply in the last few years is that it's a very dangerous thing to make the assumption that the world is a limited resource zero-sum game. And then you might say, well, how can it not be? Because there is a finite amount of certain so-called resources. And I would say, well, the reason it isn't is because there isn't any desert that we wouldn't be able to make bloom and permanently, make infinitely productive if we got our acts together in the manner that Tucker described. You know, I've been writing a new book about the biblical stories, and one of the emphasis in that corpus of stories is continual, and the central message is that if you orient yourself upward and you act with the highest regard for yourself and for other people, there's no limit to the abundance that you can bring forth. And if you have faith in that, you don't have to be concerned about sharing. You know that there's not only more than enough for everyone, that more depends on you being as generous as you possibly could be with everyone. And all that would do would be to increase what's available. And the alternative to that is exactly the WAF view, which is that, quite frankly, there's too goddamn many people on the planet. And every time I hear that, I think, just exactly what spirit is saying that? And just precisely who the hell do you think should go? And just exactly how? So I don't view human beings as an impediment to the beauty and pristineness of the Mother Earth that we've come to worship. You know, I think the notion that we're all creatures made in the image of God with an infinite transcendent worth is as true as any statement can be. And I think nothing... And I believe that there is nothing that is beyond our capability on the side of good if we aimed up and told the truth and had sufficient faith and courage, and I don't believe there's anything truer than that. And that is not what the WAF stands for. They stand for a Malthusian zero-sum game of scarcity, privation, and top-down centralized control. And with the technology that we have now, I wouldn't recommend that we do that.
May I just answer one question raised by your eloquent and absolutely right analysis of the World Economic Forum? And that is, what spirit animates them? Well, if you believe people are the problem, then that is, of course, a genocidal spirit. If I believe that the problem with my kitchen is it has too many mice, the solution is to kill the mice. Too many roaches, I kill the roaches. They're the problem. They're the impediment. And so make no mistake, and this sort of tracks with what I was saying earlier, don't lie to yourself about the agenda. If people are the problem and you're a person, then your life is in the way of whatever goals they're seeking to achieve. By definition, am I missing something? No, I'm not. But all of us, it's so grotesque because, to further elaborate in one sentence, it's a demonic spirit, just to be clear. Any spirit that seeks to hurt, kill, divide, demoralize other people is a demonic spirit by definition. So that's what animates it. You're the target, and don't lie to yourself.
All right, for clarity, we've now moved to 2-paragraph answers. And I'm okay with that. We can work with this. A little bit of history. 10, 12 years ago, I bought my way onto a whitewater rafting trip in Chile, run by Robert Kennedy Jr. The fact that I ran a coal-fired power plant caused him great concern for most of the week. The name I'm going to throw at you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Is this aimed at me?
Yeah,
I think both of us know him well. Well, I'm a friend of Bobby Kennedy's, personally, and I think, whenever politics changes people, the imperatives of running for office change people's priorities. That's true of everyone who runs for office. Ask anyone who's done it. And so I cannot assess his presidential campaign, and I won't. I'll just say one thing about him, which is at the height of COVID hysteria, he was right. He was right. And he was right at great personal cost. And I know a lot about this subject because I know a lot about him. And I'm not sort of at liberty to say all of it, but I mean, that guy suffered in a real way. He suffered more than I would suffer. They targeted his family, like actually his family. And he was absolutely right. And it does make you, I've known him a long time, like 20 years. And I remember when he went from being like the most famous, celebrated guy in Democratic politics to being someone whose name could not be mentioned. And it happened in one article where he suggested there was a connection between vaccines and autism. And I think there clearly is a connection. And I think there's a ton of scientific evidence that there's a connection. And you were not allowed to say that in the United States, the land of the free, the home of free speech. You could not say that. You couldn't have a job and say that. And the last thing I'll say is, whenever there is something that's verboten, you're literally not allowed to say or you'll be punished, that's the thing you probably should consider saying. Because they're not telling you not to say it because it's false. They don't care about lying. They are liars by their nature. They celebrate lies. Men can become women. Oh, right. No. What they hate is the truth. And so if there is an idea or even a phrase that you're literally not allowed to say, pay very close attention to that phrase because at least they think it's true. That's why they won't let you say it. Huh.
Okay, did I mention Robert F. Kennedy? Oh yeah, I did. That was your answer. Okay, I gotcha.
That was quite a complete and fulsome answer, I would say.
No, you went everywhere and you got your 3 sentences in. Jordan, a little bit of an odd one for you. Joe Rogan.
So here's 2 ways that you might judge the character of someone. The first is whether they're the same person on stage and in public as they are in private. That's Rogan. Like, what you see is what you get. He's exactly how he portrays himself. And I've been around Joe a fair bit, and around him and many other people, and around him and some very, very smart people. And it's hard to be in a room with Joe when he isn't the smartest person in the room. And so he can play lunkhead, but beneath that, like, macho and genuinely macho exterior, there's a very, very sharp mind. And then the other thing that's great about Joe is he's got a great comical side, you know. I mean, he's a professional comedian, but he's a wit, and he's extremely playful along with being brave. And that combination of playfulness and bravery, yeah, that's a testament. Playfulness, bravery, and honesty. That's Rogan. It's not a bloody accident that he's the world's most popular podcaster, you know, and thank God he's the real thing. And so, you know, 2 thumbs up for Joe Rogan.
All right, Tucker, we're going to complicate your life.
It's pretty complicated already.
Okay, Fox News.
It's an American television channel. It's on cable.
Anything else?
No, I don't. Are you allowed to watch Fox in Canada? I can never get a straight answer. I spent 14 years there.
Tucker, you were my 7 p.m. note. Everything was about 7
Well, there
p.m.
was a rumor at 1211 6th Avenue in New York, at the headquarters of the channel, that we were not on the air in Canada. No, you know, I spent 14 happy years there. I also worked at a number of other television networks for 30 years. And I will say this about Fox: they never told me what to say. They never scolded me for saying things that they clearly disagreed with. I think they disagreed with a lot of what I said. And to their great credit, they didn't try and censor me. And my deal with them was simple and very straightforward from the day I arrived, which was, I don't own this company. It's your prerogative. It's your decision to decide what's on the air, who's on the air. That includes me. I understand that. My view is I'm going to say exactly what I want. And if you don't like it, you can take me off the air. I'm not going to take instructions. You hired me to say what I think. I'm going to. And if you don't like it, just pull me off the air. And one day they did. They didn't explain why. I didn't really push them that much. I was a little confused. But I never contested their right to do that because I believe in private property. You know what I mean? And so I got a lot out of Fox News. I enjoyed my time there. I'm glad I'm not in that business anymore. I spent enough time. And I'm pretty happy, you know, like having dinner with my wife and messing around on social media.
Well, there's 4,000 plus people here delighted that you're here. And if you were still at Fox News, who fucking knows?
I will say this. I've never had a TV in my house. We don't have TV, and so I haven't seen it that much. I'll be totally honest. I had a sick relative this fall who sadly passed away, but I would go to the hospital to visit her, and it would be on, and I was like shocked. I was like, that's what it looks like? It's like, just don't watch. I just don't care for the medium.
Well, you and X are getting along rather well. Jordan, I'm going to throw a curve at you as well. Greta Thunberg.
Better men than you have tried it.
Greta Thunberg. That opens up a whole topic.
I feel bad for Greta. Look, you got to think about this, man. Just think how bloody terrifying it would be if you were a 13-year-old girl. I mean, that's terrifying enough, but if you were a 13-year-old girl who was nervous about the future because of every lie that she'd been fed, and you started to become upset about that and to speak out, and then every bloody leader in the Western world kowtowed to you as if you were a prophetess. Do you know how destabilizing that would be? How in the world would you ever recover from that? I think that given what she's been through, given the absolute cowardice and betrayal of the leaders who've worshipped at her feet, like she's some sort of sage, that she's remarkably well put together. So that's what I think of Greta Thunberg.
Thank you.
Imagine using someone like Greta Thunberg for political ends. What a cold, evil person you would have to be. An autistic child. And she's going to carry your message?
Yeah, it's a pathetic...
Well, it's disgusting.
Yep.
It's abuse of a child. And the people who abetted that, which would include the entire Western news media, ought to be ashamed. They're criminals, in my view.
All right, Tucker, I'm going to change the subject once again. This one's going to be a little more entertaining. Riley Gaines.
Oh, I love Riley Gaines. Riley Gaines
Who doesn't?
Well, she's a cool person, too. Yeah. And my favorite thing about Riley Gaines, there are a lot of things I love about Riley Gaines, but my favorite thing about Riley Gaines is she's married. Riley Gaines got married in college, which I love, and I would recommend to everybody. I think it's so important to be married, and particularly married young. I've told her this. I saw her the other day, and she came to my house in Maine when this whole first started. She's a swimmer at the University of Kentucky, and she tied some dude, and they gave the dude the trophy because he was a dude, and they're trying to eliminate the gender binary to destroy our civilization. So she was just annoyed because like they stole it from her, but she was totally. I mean, she went up against the NAACP and NBC News and every power center in American sports. And I was like, how are you able to, you're like you're a college girl, like how do you have the moral strength to do it? She was married. When you're married, it doesn't matter what happens outside the home. You come home to your teammate, and that's where the strength is. It's in your family. Those are the people who will never betray you, who have your side from beginning to end. And people who don't have that are vulnerable. It's a lot harder to be brave if you don't have a teammate. That's why the SEALs have teams. And so I love that about Riley Gaines.
Jordan, anything to add on that one?
Well, I interviewed Riley, and she is remarkably brave. She's very forthright. She's extremely vivacious. She's incredibly disciplined. She was robbed multiple times of her just rewards, which is also part of the process of dismantling meritocracy, which is a process that we're apparently deeply committed to, because who needs merit when you could have, let's say, diversity as an alternative? She's a top-rate person, and she is a great role model for everyone, but particularly for young women. You know, she stood her ground, man, and she did. You know, you talked a little bit. I don't remember if it was the video clip or when you were speaking live, but about the consequences of saying what you believe to be true. You know, I wouldn't say telling the truth exactly, because, you know, you have to be pretty presumptuous if you think you've got a hammerlock on the truth. But you could at least try to say what you believe to be true. And what's so interesting about that, and this is something, I don't know if there's anything more important than you can know than this, is that if you say what you believe to be true, you are living your life. You will have the adventure of your life. You will reveal your soul. It will make itself manifest in the world. That will make your life worthwhile, no matter what suffering you undergo, no matter what suffering you encounter. It's such a secret to know that. And Riley Gaines knows that. And she's having a hell of an adventure, you know, and she hasn't been canceled. And she's come up against some bitter and well-armed foes, but all that's going to do is make her even more than she already is. And that's something to see, because she's already quite something.
All right, loud and clear. Okay, I'm getting signals that we've used up our half hour, but I negotiated another 5 minutes, so let's see what we can do. 2 sentences each, and both of you are going to get hit with the word. And you're first. Immigration.
Immigration's like nitroglycerin. It can save your life or kill you. It depends how you apply it. Some, selective immigration that meets the needs of the country is great. Canada has had a lot of it over the years. You're proud of it, justly so. Same with my country. Unrestrained immigration done for political reasons or for reasons of racial hostility, which is why it's happening now, will absolutely eliminate your country from the map. No country does that. No country that wants to remain a country. Your country is doing it more than any other in the world, followed by my country. And if it continues, those countries won't exist. That's just a fact. Sorry.
Jordan.
That was good enough.
Nothing to add for Canada? You don't need a wall?
Well,
we already talked about that.
We had a perfectly reasonable and productive immigration strategy, and we've ramped it up to a rate that isn't integratable. And we do that because we don't think that integration is necessary. But you know what the opposite of integration is? Disintegration. It's not that hard to figure out. And you can imagine that there's a rate at which the inclusion of new people into your culture is actually invigorating. You know, the new ideas that are brought in, the different ideas that are brought in, the different skills. And then you can imagine that there's a rate that if you exceed becomes devastating. And so it's like almost everything else that's complex. If it's done well and wisely, then it's going to have a productive consequence. If it's done foolishly and bitterly, then it's going to be a disaster. And so almost everything we do in this country, especially at the federal level, is done bitterly, resentfully, and incompetently. And so you don't have to be a genius to figure out where that's leading. You just have to want to see it.
Now, I wish we had another half an hour, but where we're going to evolve to in a moment is Tucker's going to have a little work with a very important politician in the Alberta world. But let me go first with two words that I'm left with, and I've got dozens I'd love to use. But Jordan first, Alberta.
Well, you know, it says in the Gospels that to those who have been given much, much will be required. From those who are given much, much will be required. And you people in Alberta, you've been given much, not least a store of resources that are of incomprehensible value. And you have a commensurate responsibility along with that gift. And if you steward those resources properly, you could help Canada move towards an almost inconceivable abundance and do the same thing around the world. And because you've been given that gift, you have that responsibility. And the other thing that's worth understanding is that if you're given a gift and you don't shepherd it wisely and you don't take responsibility for it and you're not grateful for its provision, then it will destroy you. So make of that what you want.
Can I say one super quick thing as a non-Albertan? I think one of the reasons Canada should be grateful for Alberta, obviously for the reasons the doctor just suggested, but a lot of Canada, Eastern Canada is not grateful for Alberta. And why is that? I think one of the reasons is Alberta offers a different vision of what a thriving economy looks like. So Toronto's like banking and real estate. Can you build a real economy on banking and real estate? No. You build London's economy on banking and real estate, a completely Potemkin, a fake economy. Alberta's economy is built substantially on natural resources and on ag. That's a real economy. Those are things people want, and indeed they need to live. And so if you're in Toronto, am I pronouncing that correctly? And you look back here, it's like a challenge to you or something. You know you're inferior. It's like being the ugly sister. You're mad. That's my view.
All right. So you may have already slipped into this, but I gave Jordan Alberta. Tucker, you get Canada.
Canada?
Canada.
Well, as noted, I literally I think Canada is the prettiest country in the world. And I'm a stats guy, and I'm interested in populations, and I'm interested in landmass. I love nature above all things in this world. And Canada, you know, it's the second largest country in the world with 40 million people living in there. And if there's one criticism I would level at Canada, it's that why doesn't every single person in Canada have 6 acres of land? And why is everybody, the worst parts of Canada are your big cities, and there's one in particular that's just like, I'm sorry to say it, I think it's an atrocity. It's not worse than Gary, Indiana, or New York City, and we've got a lot of atrocity cities in my country. But like, why is Toronto the face of Canada? How about, you see the mountains right there? I've been to those mountains. They're ridiculous. They're prettier than any mountains we have in my country, a lot prettier. Have you been to northern Quebec, like above the French zone, like just into the woods? It's insane. Have you been to the Maritimes? Like, it's just, have you been to Labrador? It's the craziest country. You have so much. Why are you clustered in the crappiest places? Go discover your own country.
All right. That was the most entertaining 2-sentence vernacular that I've ever
They were run-on sentences.
encountered. But I spoke with you both before we came up, and you looked at me like you didn't think it was possible. I think you did it. I think if we had another hour, this crowd would love you. So first of all, I'm going to say thank you to Jordan for just appearing, so to speak, here. And Tucker, fucking awesome.
Thank you. Premier, thank you. Oh, first we had dinner last night and had the best time. And thank you for letting me, a rank foreigner, ask you questions. I'm grateful for that. So I want to ask you about energy.
Yes.
And I want to spend all our time talking about energy because I mean, you're the premier of Alberta. And I think it's really, really interesting. But I do feel duty-bound to ask you about something that people outside your country are paying attention to, and that's people who are imprisoned, unfortunately, in this province for what appear to be, again, I'm an outsider, and I wouldn't presume to know all the details, but I'm interested in the topic and have looked into it. There are 4 working-class men, I think there are others, but we'll just focus on the 4 who were arrested in Coutts, near the Montana border, for what appear to be political crimes and have not faced trial nor been given bail. That seems like a human rights violation at scale. It's shocking that could happen in a civilized country. Tell us what you know about that and what you think about it.
I should first say, because I know that there are representatives from mainstream media here, and they're going to ask me whether I agreed with every single word you said in the previous panel.
I hope they buzz off. I really do.
And so what I often say, especially when I'm being interviewed by the CBC, is, look, I don't agree with every word you say either, obviously, but I accept interviews and have conversations with everyone, because I think it's important for me to make sure that the world knows how incredible Alberta is, and it's my job to make sure that I can tell your audience that too. So just, I know CBC is here, so you can quote me on that one if you want. But to answer the question...
Thank you for those boos. Well deserved.
I should mention Cian Bexty from Countersignals here as well, as is Derek Vilderbrand from Western Standard. I bet the Rebel guys are here too. And I talked to all of them as well. But what I would say is I had a bit of an education when I became premier, because in our country, the criminal code is determined by the federal government. There's no interaction that you can have as a provincial leader on pardons, no interaction you can have with the police, no interaction you can have with prosecutors, no interaction you can have with the court system. I made my views very clear when I was running in the leadership that I call myself a libertarian conservative. When I was in a job very similar to yours, because I was in the media as well, I took the side of those who loved freedom and believed that we had severe government overreach. I think it's part of the reason why when the job came open, people voted for me. So I am not proud of our country for having frozen bank accounts. I'm not proud of our country for having jailed pastors. I'm not proud of our country for the fact that we still have people languishing in jail for going on 2 years, and the fact that the federal court just ruled that the federal government's actions in invoking the Emergency Act were illegal, and they chose to appeal rather than accept the judgment of the court. But it's a lawless government acting in a lawless way, and I have great sympathy for anyone who's been a victim of that.
Thank you for saying that. But given that the Trudeau government's actions as of yesterday have been ruled criminal, and you described them as lawless, which I think demonstrably they are, and given that the media outlets, the big ones in Canada, are organs of the state, literally, we don't really know anything about what these 4 men, the Coutts 4, have been accused of doing. Don't you think it would send a powerful message to go visit them in jail and find out what they've been accused of?
Well, some of you may know I had a phone call with somebody in a similar position, and what I have learned is that all I can say is the Crown operates independently. Prosecutors have to make sure that they have a reasonable likelihood of conviction, and I guess they will have to assess whether or not that is the case now with the court judgment that came down. I must tell you, it's part of the journey we've all gone on in the last year to realize just how much limitation there is. It's striking to me that a political action can be taken to launch a police charge and the criminal proceedings, but you can't take a political action to say, you know what, on sober second thought, we've reconsidered, we're wrong and we're going to vacate these charges. It's good work from people like the Canadian Constitution Foundation, Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedom, Civil Liberties Association. They are doing the work in the way that our system allows. I truly wish I could do more, but I've had my wings clipped in the last year.
I do hope someone can stand up for the most powerless in your society. Who are those for? Okay, let me ask you this. This is substance what I want to talk about, and you're an actual expert on this since you run Alberta. So many natural resources here, so much energy here, remarkable. but it's also pretty cold and not always sunny half the year. So I was stunned to learn that you have solar farms here. Is that true? That can't be real.
Well, we do, and I represent a riding that's down in southern Alberta, and this is my favorite time of year to drive past when we've got snow-covered fields, because guess what? You've also got snow-covered solar panels that aren't generating a single megawatt of solar energy. We also, I don't know if you know this, Tucker, but I was very impacted by what happened in Texas a few years ago when their power grid failed, because we've mirrored the way that they've structured their market. They've got a large base of natural gas, but they've also added wind and solar. And then when they got into an electricity crunch and the grid failed, 346 people died. Because that's what happens when the power grid fails and people rely on electricity to live. So we ended up in the last 2 years now having 14 alerts on our grid, because that's how close we are to failure. And we had to take the extraordinary measure a week ago of putting out an emergency alert to Albertans, because if we were 40 megawatts away from having to do rolling brownouts, rolling blackouts, which would have meant 120,000 homes plunged into darkness for 30 minutes at a time at 6 o'clock at night, when people are making dinner, when kids are doing homework. Imagine the impact of those who require machines to live, those who are on dialysis, or those who are in hospital. There's no possible way as a political leader that I'm going to allow the ideology against fossil fuels to impact what my job is, and that's to ensure that we've got safe, reliable, affordable power.
But I applaud you with such sincerity for taking a position on behalf of your constituents and their lives, not wanting to kill them.
May I say, because what happened that day, I know I don't like to put too many numbers out there, but to understand the scale of what we were dealing with, we were about 12,500 megawatts at our peak. So if 40 megawatts more had come on, that would have resulted in the blackouts I was just talking about. We've got 6,000 megawatts of installed wind and solar. Solar was 0. Wind was 7 megawatts. And I simply can't say to people, well, just wait till the sun comes up and the wind starts blowing at 9 o'clock in the morning, and good luck to you getting through the night. But that's, I guess, the divide that we're talking about, is I've been astonished to read some commentary after that happened was, see, your pause on renewables is wrong. You need to build more wind and solar. Like, how do you come to that conclusion, that your power grid fails because you don't have reliable power? My conclusion is you need to have more baseload power, more natural gas, but that's, I guess, the nature of the duality that we have.
It's just a little bit confusing if you step back, because power generation, power grids are highly technical, complex things designed over 100 years by engineers, and yet people who don't know anything about them have changed them. Would the same apply to, say, heart surgery? I've never gone to medical school, but I have very strong feelings about how you're doing your heart transplants. Let me impose my new heart transplant regs on you. You would say, that's insane. People will die.
I wish you would put Stephen Guilbeault in your crosshairs as you're doing.
Is he an engineer?
He's an environmental zealot. He happens to be our environment minister federally. And I guess if you put that question to him, he believes he has the expertise and knowledge to tell us in Alberta how to run our power grid. I don't know if you know much about Stephen Guilbeault. I don't know if I've ever heard you talk about him.
I'm wanting to learn less just by your description.
Well, one thing I find so offensive, you talk about the disrespect to our province. This is a guy who is an environmental advocate. He's best known for scaling the CN Tower in opposition of fossil fuels when he was working as an environmental advocate. But he also scaled the house of our premier.
So he's a rock climber,
well,
not an engineer.
Maybe he'd be better at that. But imagine that. Imagine somebody going and taking a criminal offense, going onto the roof of a premier, and then they make that person in charge of trying to dictate to us how to pull our resources out of ground, how to manage our natural resources, how to manage our electricity grid. That's what Justin Trudeau has done. So I'm trying to get him fired, and I would love your help on that.
It seems like for decades, the kind of rich kid lifestyle liberalism that now dominates everything was confined to kind of sociology departments at liberal arts colleges. Who made the decision to allow people like that to have control over medical schools, power grids, airlines? That seems like a bad idea.
Well, I wonder if you've got the same dynamic in the U.S. One of the things that I've noticed here as conservatives is that we have vacated all of the opinion-shaping institutions in society. So we vacated the media. The media is now almost, with the exception of some of the alternative media I mentioned, they are almost all of a particular mindset, a progressive mindset. The universities, and Dr. Peterson speaks of this very well, almost uniformly are they of an ideology that penalizes kids, quite frankly. If they want to write a paper about conservatism, they get marked down. You hear about that regularly. If you look at Hollywood, Hollywood's terrible when it comes to the messages and how they portray conservatives, how they portray capitalism. And I think as well, we have increasingly become urbanized. And so I suppose when you get disconnected from the land, disconnected from something real, disconnected from the dirty jobs, then do you understand that when you turn the lights on it, they only work because of everything that is happening out in the rural area. When you go and fill up your car, it's only happening because we've been able to have people who are developing our natural resources. I think that's one of the disconnects that we end up having.
I think that's such a smart analysis and totally true. But providing electricity to your population is not some kind of like boutique add-on you get if you pay extra taxes. That's like a baseline requirement of being a state. And if you can't provide electricity, you're a failed state, right?
I think you may be surprised to hear me praise Michael Moore, because I think he has done more to recalibrate what we need to be thinking about with electricity. Prior to his movie, Planet of the Humans, I think there was this ideology that all you had to do is put up wind and solar and batteries and you get free electricity. And I think people actually believed that that was true. They didn't talk about the intermittency, nor did they talk about the fact that wind and solar aren't truly carbon neutral. I mean, you can't make a wind turbine without steel. Lots of carbon that goes into that. Fiberglass as well, lots of carbon that goes into that. The cement at the base, there's lots of carbon that goes into that. And the truckloads that it takes to get it to site, all of that is gasoline and diesel. But that's the kind of the piece that he put together, is he realized that you can't have wind and solar without a heavy reliance on fossil fuels. And I think it blew up the paradigm. And so now we're beginning to have a more honest conversation about what that looks like. But I think that there is this fantasy thinking that because people don't know how things work, that they believe that these simplistic solutions that are offered by politicians are actually achievable. And it makes it harder for conservatives and politicians who do have to actually make things work to kind of bust through, especially when you've got the media stacked against you and trying to get the message out, and try to make people realize that these things matter. We can transition over time to reduce emissions so that we have less impact on the environment, and that's all great. But affordability and reliability have got to be top of mind for anybody making decisions that impact people's lives.
So you literally have no solar-powered steel furnaces in Canada?
Not one.
Okay. Last question, because we're almost out of time, and I'm, again, so thankful that you're willing to do this. Where do you think this goes? You just said that your province, which is the energy-rich province of your country, was almost out of electricity just recently. So does this, if at the current trajectory, it'll be Bolivia in terms of its power grid. Does that get better soon, or does it continue to get, what's your projection?
Well, fortunately, we do have people who have soldiered on and are going to bring on new baseload natural gas power in the new year. So that will stabilize on that front. Yeah. We also, I would like to take a page out of what the Americans are doing, really, because on the one hand, the federal leadership is talking along the same lines that...
Oh, I've noticed.
But look what's happening. America has become the largest producer of oil and gas for export in that same period of time, while all of the politicians have said they're going in the opposite direction. So I think we should just double down and decide we're going to double our oil and gas production, because... Truly, like, where else does America want to get its oil from? Do you want to get it from Iran? Do you want to get it from Venezuela? Or
Well,
do
we
you want to get
are.
it from safe Canada? So I think that we can do a lot to make sure that the Americans know that we are here to provide energy security. We are a great friend, great ally, great neighbor, and we just need to get the political leadership to realize that we are a friend.
Then my 3-word piece of advice would be stop being embarrassed about who you are. You have nothing to be embarrassed about at all.
That's great advice.
Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Wait, can I say? Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. One thing we have learned after many years in the news business is that every once in a while you've got to eat some crow and admit that despite your best intentions, you were completely wrong about something. Tonight is one of those times. For nearly 4 years now, we've been under the impression, an impression we regularly communicated to you, our viewers, that actor Jussie Smollett was the greatest BS artist since Bill Clinton, that he was a transparent race hoaxer who fooled the dummies in the national media but could not fool us. That's what we thought. We thought Jussie Smollett was a liar. You remember his story. It did seem unlikely. Late one night in sub-zero temperatures in a snowstorm, Jussie Smollett decided to venture out for a sandwich in downtown Chicago when he was, as people are, accosted by 2 physically enormous Trump supporters from Africa who somehow recognized him despite his ski hat from his part in a little-known musical drama series called Empire, because campy musical dramas are apparently huge with musclehead Trump voters from Nigeria. So they knew him instantly, right away. These 2 crazed African right-wing maniacs also correctly guessed that Jussie Smollett had voted for Hillary Clinton, and they hated that. And so, as Trump voters so often do, they began pummeling him about the face and screaming, "This is MAGA country!" Because that's one of the things people typically say about downtown Chicago. It's MAGA country. Then, because they were still angry, they're always angry, these Nigerian racists poured bleach on Jussie Smollett, threw a noose around his neck, and then ran off into the night howling with demented glee. Here's how Jussie Smollett described it.
And I see the attacker masked, and he said, "This MAGA country," punches me right in the face. I was just jumped. And then I look down and I see that there's a rope around my neck.
Yeah. We're going to be honest with you. We had some questions about that story. It just didn't sound right to us. Something was off. Crazed Nigerian Trump voters assaulting liberals in downtown Chicago? How common is this? Chicago has 50 aldermen, and not a single one of them is a Republican. Chicago has not had a Republican mayor in 80 years. Donald Trump got 12% of the vote in Chicago. It didn't really seem like MAGA country. But boy, were we wrong. Not only is Chicago a right-wing Donald Trump stronghold, last night the QAnon army came for Lori Lightfoot. Lightfoot, of course, is the mayor of Chicago and a consummate neoliberal. She's the one who prevented Chicago cops from chasing criminals on foot because chasing criminals is racist. She's the mayor who plunged Chicago even further into debt for a good cause to pay for the Department of Climate and Environmental Equity. And in fact, Lightfoot's commitment to equity was so profound that she banned white reporters from talking to her. She took down not 1, but 2 statues of Christopher Columbus, who was a racist. So you would think if anybody would be safe in Chicago, which is roughly 100% Democratic Party voters, it would be Lori Lightfoot. Oh, but no. According to Lori Lightfoot, the extreme MAGA Republicans, the ones who tried to bleach Jussie Smollett, activated their sleeper cells around the city, and they showed up at the polls en masse, which means lots of them at once. And the effect was to make Lori Lightfoot the first Chicago mayor in 40 years to lose re-election. As Lightfoot put it last night at her non-victory party, these MAGA Republicans hated her not because of what she did, but because of who she is. Asked directly whether her defeat in the Democratic primary had been unfair, Lightfoot answered this way, quote, "I'm a black woman in America. Of course." Now, one of the many tragedies here, and there are so many layers of tragedy, is that Lori Lightfoot, insightful as she's always been, saw this racist insurgency coming for years. Here she was in 2021.
Mayor, in recent months, there have been questions raised about your temperament and your reaction to criticism. Tribune editorial used the term irascible. How much of this do you think might have to do with the fact that you're a woman, and specifically a black woman?
about 99% of it.
Yeah. Because the thing is, there are no women in Chicago. It's an entirely male and right-wing city. And so all opposition to Lori Lightfoot derived from her race and gender. It's not that people were angry about violent crime in Chicago. That never crossed her mind. No. Here instead is her explanation from last night's concession speech.
Obviously, we didn't win the election today, but I stand here with my head held high and a heart full of gratitude. I'm grateful that we worked together to remove a record number of guns off our streets, reduced homicides, and started making real progress on public safety.
Obviously, you didn't win. That's true. You got spanked like the bad little mayor you were. Wabba, wabba. But according to the Chicago Police Department, we're also happy she was mayor because she made the city a lot better. Here's what the police said in a statement, quote, "Over the past 3 years, robberies, burglaries, and thefts hit record lows in Chicago." Each of these crime categories saw decreases not seen for the last 50 years. Oh, it's a lot safer than it's ever been in 50 years. Is that true? Well, let's check the same police department's own statistics, and here they are. From 2019 to 2023 in Chicago, robberies went up, not down, actually, up 27%. Theft, nearly 40%. Murder, kind of a significant category, 59%. How about motor vehicle theft? Is that up or down? Oh, it's up 270%. So if you'd average all that out, that means all crime is up 33%. There were 300 more murders by gunshot in 2021 than there were in 2019. There were 2,000 more shooting victims. There were 30% more overall shootings. So that's not a safer city, actually. That's a much more dangerous city that people are fleeing for their very lives. What's interesting is that the people in charge of making the place safer are still working to make it much more dangerous. The top prosecutor in the city, Lori Lightfoot's ally Kim Foxx, is rejecting thousands of felony cases every year, just not prosecuting crimes. In 2022, for example, Chicago prosecutors had a total of 20,000 felony cases come in the door, and out of those, they rejected right out of hand 2,000. They pursued, out of 20,000 cases, just 1,900 to indictment, not to conviction, just to indictment, charging people. And those numbers are not an anomaly. They're similar for every other year of Lori Lightfoot's historically disastrous tenure as mayor. And what's happening? Well, people are fleeing Chicago, as noted, because they don't want to get killed. And you can see that in the home prices. Where are home prices highest in America? Of the 12 highest priced home markets in America, 9 are in Florida, because people are fleeing there. The opposite is true of Chicago. The median home price is less than the median home price in the country as a whole. In fashionable Chicago, the median home price in Chicago is $270,000. So who did this? Well, it was a group effort, but Lori Lightfoot was the mayor. But it's not her fault. You know whose fault it is? Businesses and residents, pedestrians. They made themselves easy targets. Watch.
I'm disappointed that they're not doing more to take safety and make it a priority. For example, we still have retailers that won't institute plans like having security officers in their stores, making sure that they've got cameras that are actually operational, locking up their merchandise at night, chaining high-end bags. These purses seem to be something that is attracting a lot of attention on these organized retail theft units.
Wait, what? Did she just blame the stores for getting robbed? How is that different from saying, well, you're wearing a halter top? Of course you got raped. I mean, it's not different, actually. It's blaming the victim. It's disgusting. When was the last time you saw a mayor of a city blame crime victims for being victimized? Well, you just saw Lori Lightfoot do it. So crime is no longer punished, by and large, in Chicago, unless you disrespect Lori Lightfoot's authority. And in that case, you went straight to jail. Watch.
Now, I've directed Superintendent Brown to order all police districts to give special attention to these parties. And this is how it's going to be. We will shut you down, we will cite you, and if we need to, we will arrest you, and we will take you to jail. Period. We will take you to jail. We'll arrest you and take you to jail. Not if you shoot somebody.
if you break Lori Lightfoot's COVID law. But of course, COVID law didn't apply to her because why would dictators follow their own edicts? And so Lori Lightfoot immediately broke the state's stay-at-home order to get a haircut. And when she was busted getting her haircut, not a very good haircut, we'll have to say, she blamed, of course, everybody else.
I'm the public face of this city. I'm on national media, and I'm out in the public eye. And you know, I'm a person who I take my personal hygiene very seriously. As I said, I felt like I needed to have a haircut. I'm not able to do that myself, and so I got a haircut.
So now Lori Lightfoot is gone. Who comes next? We have no idea. We don't live in Chicago. We're not even going to speculate on the state of local politics in that city. All we know is the most flamboyantly horrible mayor in the country was punished. The system worked. And if it worked in Chicago, maybe it could work in New Orleans, where LaToya Cantrell is quickly destroying one of the most charming cities in the world. But part of us, if we're being honest, will miss Lori Lightfoot. Despite all the human suffering she caused, there's part of us that kind of enjoyed it by embodying every one of her party's excesses over the past 4 years. Lori Lightfoot inadvertently helped to expose them. Here you had a complete buffoon, someone who ran around bragging about having a large penis. We're just telling you what she said. Somehow running one of the greatest cities in the world. At times it didn't seem like even Lori Lightfoot could believe she was mayor. She clearly didn't really care for the job. Here she is. Just save the tape. Save the tape. That's always our counsel from May of 2020 till now, March 1st of 2023. American politicians, the entire class, have gone completely insane, and a lot of it is caught on video. And future generations won't believe it when you tell them, so save the tape. But tonight we're going to celebrate. A lot of people have spent a lot of time over the years trying to get rid of this mayor, and we would say at the top of that list is Chicago Alderman, our friend Raymond Lopez, who joins us tonight for an after-action report. Congratulations, Alderman Lopez, on what happened last night. I have no idea what's going to happen next, but it's worth pausing for a moment to say democracy worked, is it not?
Absolutely, Tucker. Good evening. And before we start, let me just say our hearts and prayers are with an officer in Chicago tonight that was shot in the line of duty in the most dangerous of American cities right now. But with what happened with yesterday's election, democracy worked. And the pendulum, I believe, is starting to swing in the right direction, back to the middle, back towards common sense, where the outrageous policies of woke narratives and agendas are coming to an end. And I think that we have one more chance in Chicago, one more hurdle to reach, where we finally put this to rest, where we can have common sense prevail across the entire city, where the law-abiding citizens are the ones that we're fighting for, and that where the city is no longer safe for criminals, but for the good people of the city of Chicago.
You always set the most basic possible standards for governance, like can you walk outside your house without worrying about getting shot to death? And I think that's the place to start. So do you think, you said there's one more chance, is there a candidate who you think would uphold that standard?
Yes, I think we have a runoff in 6 weeks in the city of Chicago because nobody got the majority of the votes yesterday, one of which is Paul Vallis, the former CPS school CEO and former budget director for the city of Chicago. He's backed by law enforcement, supports all our first responders, and is basically billing himself as a problem solver. His opponent is the Cook County Commissioner, Brandon Johnson, who is super left, tied with our teachers union. And his claim to fame is being able to take away the background checks for renters so that landlords don't know who they're renting to.
Come on.
Just yesterday would not disavow looting in the city of Chicago as a justifiable means. So I think we have some pretty clear choices in Chicago. It's just up to the voters to not fall for the narratives, not fall for the race baiting and gaslighting, but to focus on what we need to do to put our city back together.
So one candidate is for restoring safe streets, the other won't disavow looting. So it seems like a pretty clear choice. Alderman Lopez, I hope you'll come back with an update on that race. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And congratulations.
Thank you, Tucker.
In August of 2020, Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 men in self-defense. There's no dispute that it was in self-defense. It's all on video, and a jury reached that same conclusion. So that's a fact. He shot them in self-defense. But self-defense itself is no longer a defense. It's becoming illegal in this country. One of the men who tried to murder Kyle Rittenhouse with a gun in his hand, which is on video, is now suing Kyle Rittenhouse. How does that work? Well, Kyle Rittenhouse joins us to respond straight ahead. Plus, our second gentleman, the dude who's married to Kamala Harris, who won't kiss him without a mask on, has some thoughts about toxic masculinity, ladies and gentlemen. Buckle up. You may be wondering, what does Carmela's husband Doug do all day? He's second gentleman. Well, Doug has just announced a major initiative to fight America's greatest problem, toxic masculinity.
Can we just talk about masculinity for a moment? Has being second gentleman changed your own view of perceived gender roles or what it means to be a man?
This is something I've thought about a lot and something I've spoken about a lot. There's too much of toxicity, it's masculine toxicity out there, and we've kind of confused what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine, where you've got this trope out there that you've got to be tough and, angry and lash out to be strong. Just the opposite. And I'm going to continue to use this platform every time I get to speak out against this toxic masculinity that's out there.
Carmela's husband Doug talks to the church lady on MSNBC. Let's just pause and let that video sink in. That's the greatest piece of tape we've ever played anywhere, and we don't mean to doubt Doug Emhoff's sincerity. If anyone is doing his part, more than his part, to fight the scourge of masculinity in this country, it's our second gentleman. At the height of the BLM riots back in August of 2020, Kyle Rittenhouse went to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where his father lived. And that night, because he was asked to, he helped protect local businesses from the mob of people looting, destroying, and burning. As he was doing that, a mentally ill child molester called Joseph Rosenbaum tried to kill Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse defended himself and shot Rosenbaum, and then several men began chasing Rittenhouse down the street. One of them was called Gage Grosskreutz. When Rittenhouse went to the ground, Grosskreutz pointed a gun at him. In response, Rittenhouse shot him in the arm. That was obviously self-defense. It was on camera, and Grosskreutz admitted that at trial. Watch.
Does this look like right now your arm is being shot?
That looks like my bicep being vaporized, yes.
Okay. And it's being vaporized as you're pointing your gun directly at him? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so when you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
So, yes, I pointed a loaded gun in his face because I wanted to kill him, and he shot me in the arm, disabling me and prevented me from killing him. Well, yeah, that's the appropriate use of force in the cause of self-defense. But because self-defense is no longer allowed in the United States, the man who tried to kill Kyle Rittenhouse is now suing Kyle Rittenhouse for preventing him from killing Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse joins us now. Kyle, thanks so much for coming on. It's almost unbelievable that a man who tried to kill you and was prevented from killing you by your act of self-defense is now suing you because he wasn't able to kill you. How does that work?
Thank you for having me, Tucker. And honestly, I have no idea. It's ridiculous, this lawsuit. It's very frustrating and it's upsetting. This is honestly, to me, an attack on our Second Amendment rights and our rights to self-defense. And it's saying if you use your God-given right to self-defense, they're going to come after you. If you win in court, you're acquitted, rightfully so. They're going to take you to civil court and they're going to take you for everything you're worth. They're going to drive you into bankruptcy and drown you in a mountain of legal bills.
So that's what's actually happening. We're watching this happen all over the country. Civil suits used to shut down free speech, to end the Second Amendment, to void the Bill of Rights, and to destroy people who stand up against the mob, like you. Who's funding this suit? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea who's funding this lawsuit. All I know is that there's a powerhouse of attorneys behind Gage Grosskreutz, and I have Mark Richards and I know we're going to win to court, but it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money to fight these attorneys. They're very powerful. You can go to www.givesandgo.com/Kyle Rittenhouse to help me take on these lawyers so they don't come after more people. Because if they can come after me, they will come after you.
Well, of course, and they are coming after people all over the country. It's an undercovered story, the use of the civil courts to void the Bill of Rights and destroy anyone who stands in the way of their total takeover of the country. How old are you, by the way, at this point?
I'm 20 years old. I was 17 when Gage Grosskreutz pointed the pistol in my head.
Yeah, a loaded pistol, and tried to kill you, and you did absolutely the right thing, and you disabled him before he could murder you. And I assume at 20, you probably just kind of want to go live the rest of your one hopes long life, right?
Absolutely. But, you know, they're trying to, they don't want me to, like, they want me to go away, but they want to drown me in these legal bills, and they want to sue me and pretty much not allow me to live a normal 20-year-old life.
Yeah. Well, you did the right thing. You know, if someone points a loaded gun in your face and tries to kill you, you have not just a right but an obligation to respond, and you did. So Kyle Rittenhouse, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and Godspeed
thank you, Tucker.
in what's happening to you. So our producer's embedded with Kyle Rittenhouse during his grotesque criminal trial. The documentary is called The Trial of Kyle. It's on Fox Nation. So you may have noticed a lot of disasters, kind of hard to know why, suddenly affecting our food supply in the United States. Now there's another one. All over the country, cows, source of beef and milk, are becoming ill and dying. One farmer says dozens of his cows have died since August. He'll join us next to explain what's happening. All the things to pay attention to, the food supply has got to be pretty close to the top of the list, and that's why we covered it when large numbers of chickens began dying around the country. Now cows are dying. The culprit appears to be an outbreak of a tick-borne disease called filaria. That outbreak is believed to have begun in New Jersey in 2017, then spread to Northern Virginia, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and beyond. Christopher Haskins is a commercial beef farmer in beautiful Chatham, Virginia, the far southern part of the state. He says he's lost 41 cows since August. That's cost him $60 grand and delayed his calving schedule significantly. Christopher Haskins joins us tonight. Mr. Haskins, thank you so much for coming on. Tell us what this is and how it's affected your herd.
Yes, sir, and thank you, Tucker, and thank you for caring about something that's affecting the agriculture industry. So about in August, we generally start calving in September of every year. In August, though, we start keeping a check on our cattle herd just to make sure everything is going as planned. On August the 4th, I found a cow that had passed away. Didn't think much of it at the time. You're going to lose a cow every now and then in this business. That following week, though, I found another cow that had passed, and I told my father, I said, you know, that something's going on here. I'm not quite sure what it is. They weren't due to calf at that time. Well, then by the third week of August, we were losing multiple cows a day. And fortunately, my wife's a veterinarian, and I've got some good relationships with other veterinarians in my area. So we got some cattle up. I had some cows having calving problems, and I normally never have that. Maybe I pull one calf a year from a cow assisted birth. I had 4 in 2 days, and so on a Monday, that third week of August, I noticed a cow that wasn't acting right, staying down to the creek by herself in the shade when others were out grazing. So I tried to feed this cow, and she tried to attack me, and so then I knew something was up. So I contacted one of the local large animal vets and told him that I knew I had a problem in my herd. And I was pretty sure this animal would die within the next few hours, and if he could come draw a blood sample, I sure would appreciate it, because at the moment she we weren't going to be able to draw blood from her being in the shape she was in. And so the cow died within a couple of hours. The vet came out, drew the blood. The blood looked like Kool-Aid. It was very watery, where the cow was so anemic. And he sent that off to our local lab, and unfortunately, I kept losing cattle throughout the week before I got the results back. And that Wednesday morning, I about mentally and physically really had it, to be honest with you. So I contacted VDAX, here in Virginia looking for somewhere that maybe could do a necropsy for me, because I knew I was going to lose an animal that day. I just didn't know when. And that evening I lost 2 more animals, and I loaded one of the animals up and took it for a necropsy in Whitfield, Virginia at a lab. And that next day I was told by the veterinarian that did the necropsy that more than likely it was this disease Theileria, and the spleen of the animal was 2 times the normal size, and it was very jaundiced or yellow inside. And so that's when that's when we knew what was going on. But then my animals continued to die. I lost my last one on October the 12th.
Unbelievable. Christopher Haskins, thank you so much from Chatham, Virginia. I'd like to keep track of that stuff, and I hope it doesn't spread much farther than it already has. And I hope you come back with an update if it does. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. Just trying to tell us what it is. Doctor, thanks for coming on.
Hi, Tucker. You know, first of all, it connects to something you started the show with when you were talking about Chicago, because Chicago is 65,000 homeless, and they're overflowing into these shelters into O'Hare Airport, where there's encampments and a lot of violence is going on and crime. In L.A., there's 50,000 homeless that don't have shelters. In New York, they are sheltered. Almost 70,000 are sheltered. And I'll tell you in a minute why shelters make a difference as step one. I have 3 steps for what our Democrat mayors could actually do if they're listening. 3 steps. But as you said, mental illness is a big part of this. 13 times more likely to become homeless if you were in prison. Domestic abuse, you lose your house, you lose your job. That's what we're dealing with here. And mental illness is really high up. So what do? Number one, you provide shelters. You got to have extensive shelters, but that's not enough. Affordable housing would be nice, and L.A. does not have that. That's why everyone's fleeing L.A., and so we need affordable housing. Number 2, we need community service here. We need the community to get involved and not just give somebody a place to live, but how about something to do? A bridge to jobs, maybe give some payment, something to give somebody their self-worth back. And the third idea is we need to address this mental illness, 1/3 severe mental illness. We need clinics on wheels in cities that come and take care of our homeless and deal with the mental illness parts. And in prisons, by the way, I told you at the beginning, prisons are heavily involved in this. We need prison reform, Tucker, because 85% of prisoners are suffering from drug abuse. And I'll tell you, there's one state that's going to surprise you that actually has a handle on this. It's Rhode Island. They do a lot of reform in Rhode Island. So the homelessness problem, if our Democrat mayors are listening, get them housing, get them medical care, and give them something to do, Tucker.
Dr. Mark Siegel tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The fentanyl epidemic has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. One mother who lost 2 of her sons to it joins us after the break with a message for Congress. Rebecca Kiesling lost both of her sons, if you can imagine that, to fentanyl. Her 18-year-old son, Kyler, and her 20-year-old son, Caleb, both were poisoned in 2020 when they took what they thought were Percocet pills, but they weren't. They were fentanyl. Yesterday, Rebecca Kiesling testified in the House of Representatives. She pointed out that our government isn't doing anything to protect America's young people from this.
If we had Chinese troops lining up along our southern border with weapons aimed at our people, with weapons of mass destruction aimed at our cities, you damn well know you would do something about it. We have a weather balloon from China going across our country. Nobody died, and everybody's freaking out about it. But 100,000 die every year, and nothing's being done. Not enough is being done. Numbers are going up, not down. You're welcoming drug dealers across our border. You're giving them protection. You're not protecting our children.
Rebecca Kiesling joins us tonight. Ms. Kiesling, thank you so much for coming on. You certainly made the point to the Congress. Do you think they heard you?
More than half of them did. But I was really appalled at some of the rhetoric that I heard, honestly, from the Democrats, saying that they've heard a lot of fear-mongering. Like, are you kidding me? Like, 110,000 died in 2021. Like, we have a reason to be afraid. China is going after our children. We've got rainbow fentanyl now in candy boxes coming into this country. And now they're mixing fentanyl with a horse tranquilizer so that Narcan won't work, so it can't be detected by fentanyl strips. Like, they're trying to kill off our population. And you're going to accuse me and the others testifying that we're fear-mongering?
So you lost both your sons to poisoning by a foreign government, and you're a fearmonger? What was your reaction? It's hard even to believe that happened. What was your reaction to that? It's so disgusting.
Well, I was really upset by the guy from the Cato Institute who testified that the problem is demand. And that's like some of the rhetoric that I've heard on social media since I testified. People saying, oh, they wanted it. Like they were doing something illegal, so they deserve to die. I mean, people didn't used to die from experimenting with drugs. And of course I taught my children not to do drugs. They heard it more than anybody else because their birth mother was a drug addict. But they still experimented anyway. And unfortunately, over 100,000 are, and they're dying. They still deserve to be protected. It's a health issue. They deserved real help, but they deserve to be protected from an attack by, as you said, a foreign nation.
Well, I mean, they didn't take fentanyl. They took what they thought was Percocet, and like so many young people, they were poisoned to death by something that was mislabeled. I mean, no different from the Tylenol murders that took place 40 years ago, where people put cyanide in Tylenol. They thought they were taking Tylenol, they got cyanide. I mean, but the libertarian response was, it's their fault. They deserve it.
Right. That's what I'm seeing on social media. There's some people that are extremely callous. I mean, how cold-hearted can you be to speak to me like that, to say such horrible things that they deserve to die and that I was a horrible mother and somebody should have called CPS. I mean, they know nothing about what happened and how much I tried and how I sought help for them through the school, through the police. I mean, they have no idea what I went through to fight for them.
Yeah, well, we've interviewed a lot, I know personally, a number of parents in your position, and to blame you for it or your children who died from poisoning is really, well, you'd really have to be the Cato Institute to do that. So I'm sorry you had to hear it. Rebecca Kiesling, thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. So Buckhead is a neighborhood at the north part of Atlanta. It's a very pretty place. Atlanta itself is very, very dangerous. It's mismanaged. It's a famously corrupt city. The thing is that Buckhead pays for like the whole city. So the people of Buckhead have decided, well, wait a minute, why are we paying for a city that is this mismanaged and this dangerous and that hates us? And so some in Buckhead have decided to split and become their own town. That's called democracy, where you govern your own town. And it has achieved a major victory. 2 bills in the legislature in Georgia would allow Buckhead to secede and become self-governing. They just passed a Georgia Senate committee. A floor vote is imminent. Bill White is the volunteer CEO of the Buckhead City Committee. He joins us now. Bill, I think for the 3rd time, thank you so much for what you've done on this. It's important not just for Buckhead, but for the whole country to see that democracy can exist in the United States. You get to govern your own town if you want. How close are you to pulling this off, do you think?
Well, thank you so much, Tucker, for having us on. And we are on the eve of a historic vote in the Georgia State Senate. We have had a great champion in our Lieutenant Governor, Burt Jones. We thank him, Tucker, and we are confident that he will bring us the votes that we need to prevail in the Senate. The Lieutenant Governor assures us that he will do everything in his power to help us get this 2 bills out of his chamber. After Georgia's last Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Duncan, it's a breath of fresh air that we have a leader of the state Senate who doesn't bow to the city of Atlanta. We've been working on this legislation, as you know, Tucker, for over 2 years. And Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones has been invaluable in helping keep this momentum on the rails. Tomorrow is our big test of his leadership, and I think he will pass that test with flying colors. We're counting on our Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and the Georgia State Senate, led by our great Republicans, to hold the city of Atlanta accountable once and for all.
I mean, this really is a test of democracy. You're being attacked as some sort of hate figure because you want self-government. Since when did democracy become so unfashionable? I thought everyone was in favor of democracy. What happened?
Yeah, all we're asking for is the right to vote. You know, on the May 24th primary last year, 960,000 Georgia voters voted yes in all 159 counties on the Buckhead City ballot question. So those people elect our Georgia state representatives, and they've sent a clear message. Even in Fulton County, we got 80% of the Republican votes in Fulton County to just let us vote. And, you know, they have never not let a cityhood movement that came before them not be permitted to have the right to vote. Actually, I call on Andre Dickens, the mayor of Atlanta, to just come out here and say, let us all vote. What's the problem with voting? May the best campaign win.
Because they hate democracy. They also hate you, but they want you to pay for everything as they mismanage Buckhead into chaos, right? So if you win this, I think it will be a sign for towns across the country. You don't have to be managed into the ground by criminals who hate you. You can run your own affairs. It's democracy. So good, best of luck. Bill White, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Tucker. God bless you.
Thank you. Well, when a community is about to secede from a city, you have to ask, what do we do to fix this country? Obviously, we're on the wrong path. One man has thought a lot about that question. He joins us next. Depressing, but also Byzantine and interesting murder trial in South Carolina tonight. We've got Judge Janine in a moment to take us through exactly what happened and what happens next. But first, you always imagine in your mind's eye that it's evil men who destroy a society, wild-eyed, spit-flecked dictators pounding the podium to demand the annihilation of their enemies. That's the Hollywood version of it. But in real life, people like that rarely get very far. They're too obvious. It's not the cartoon demons you've got to worry about. It's weak men in positions of power. They're the most dangerous. Men with no principles but the desire for self-preservation. Hollow men who live in terror of being revealed for who they really are. Men who will do anything to save themselves. That's who you should be afraid of. And you can see that in our current moment. The weakest are the most destructive. How much of his childhood do you think Adam Kinzinger spent hanging from the wedgie nail? How many swirlies did Eric Swalwell endure in high school? How old was Adam Schiff before a girl other than his sister kissed him voluntarily? It makes you shudder to think about it. These are sad, insecure, broken men filled with envy and bitterness from their lonely childhoods. They hate you because they hate themselves. It's not their masculinity that's toxic, it's their lack of it. That's really the story of the Biden administration. The weakest president in history joined forces with the weakest attorney general in history to create a police state. Shocking? Well, once you understand the principle, it shouldn't really surprise you. And it's funny now to remember that the smart people in Washington once told us that Merrick Garland was a moderate. They thought that apparently because when Garland's promised Supreme Court seat didn't materialize, he cried. Oh, he's crying, they thought. He's so sensitive and thoughtful. But no, Merrick Garland was crying for himself because he is a self-pitying careerist with no perspectives on his own life, whose job is everything to him. He is, in other words, literally the last person you would ever put in charge of the Department of Justice. So naturally, Joe Biden did. And that turned out to be a pivotal decision. Merrick Garland has presided over the most aggressive attack on civil liberties, and in particular an attack on the practice of traditional Christianity, that any living American has seen. Now, Garland would never say that in public, of course. That would be too straightforward. His approach is feline, not canine. Every word is a weasel word. But under sustained questioning, the real Merrick Garland emerges, and it is filthy and dishonest. Here he was in the Senate yesterday, facing off against Mike Lee of Utah.
DOJ has announced charges against 34 individuals for blocking access to or vandalizing abortion clinics. And there have been over 81 reported attacks on pregnancy centers, 130 attacks on Catholic churches since the leak of the Dobbs decision, and only 2 individuals have been charged. So how do you explain this disparity?
We apply the law equally. I will say you are quite right. There are many more prosecutions with respect to the blocking of the abortion centers, but that is generally because those actions are taken with photography at the time, during the daylight, and seeing the person who did it is quite easy. Those who are attacking the pregnancy resources centers, which is a horrid thing to do, are doing this at night in the dark.
Okay, in case you didn't follow that, we quote, apply the law equally. We just can't for some reason manage to investigate crimes that occur after dark. It's the sundown rule, well known in legal circles. It's hard to believe that Merrick Garland actually said that in a Senate hearing until you remember that, of course, he will say anything, and he does. We're not persecuting Christians, he'll tell you. Then he'll send the FBI after Mark Houck. Houck is a pro-life lay preacher who was praying outside an abortion clinic when a pro-abortion extremist harassed his 12-year-old son. So as any father would, Houck shoved the man out of his son's face. That's what happened. It was not a crime. We know that because no local prosecutor pursued it. And it is certainly, without question, not a federal felony to push a lunatic out of your 12-year-old son's face. But under Merrick Garland, it is now a felony. Almost a year after that happened, Garland sent armed men to arrest Mark Houck in front of his family.
On September 23rd, about 6:45 in the morning, that's when those 20 so-called agents, full SWAT gear, heavily armored vests, ballistic shields, helmets, battering ram, banged on my door.
Yesterday, Josh Hawley asked Garland to explain that behavior, the utterly indefensible totalitarian behavior. And Merrick Garland, of course, in his soft-spoken way, was delighted to defend it.
Let's take a look at the hardened criminals that your Justice Department sent these armed agents to go terrorize on that morning. Here they are at Mass. Here's the 7 children with Mr. Houck and his wife. He has offered to turn himself in, and this is who you go to terrorize. You are the Attorney General. Give me your answer. Do you think that it was objectively reasonable and they followed your guidelines in sending 20 to 30 armed agents to terrorize these people? Yes or no?
The facts I have, which are those presented by the FBI, are not consistent with your description.
So you think it was reasonable?
I'm saying the facts are not as you describe.
You use an unbelievable show of force with guns that I just note liberals usually decry. We're supposed to hate long guns and assault-style weapons. You're happy to deploy them against Catholics and innocent children.
You have to wonder when you see a tape like that, where are so-called Christian leaders? Where's Russell Moore and all the other breastfeeding Christians as that happens, as the U.S. government cracks down on Christianity, on prayer? Silent. Paul Vaughn and his co-conspirators now face more than a decade in prison. Meanwhile, just in case you want to know what the scale is for punishment, the Department of Justice under Joe Biden let half the rioters go who tried to torch a courthouse in Oregon. No charges whatsoever. Of 99 cases that the Portland U.S. Attorney brought over that courthouse siege for crimes like assaulting federal officers and civil disorder, more than 47 were dropped by DOJ. The most serious penalties for most of the defendants who pleaded guilty turned out to be community service. So the DOJ under Merrick Garland absolves Joe Biden voters of actual terrorism while doing everything they can to terrify, humiliate, and destroy people who pray in public. They're targeting specifically anyone who is religious, humiliating them in front of their children. Now, why are they doing this? Well, because on some level, all governments hate religious people because it's competition. And revolutionary governments, totalitarian governments, go after religious people first. It happened in the French Revolution, happened in the Bolshevik Revolution, and it's happening now. That's why parents who dare to complain about their children being sexually indoctrinated and openly sexualized are attacked, in some cases, by the DOJ. Again, you can see why. Young people raised to believe that God is in charge are much harder for the government to control as they grow up. They won't worship the government. But, by contrast, if a child is raised to be a narcissist, someone who thinks, well, I can change my gender, he will grow up confused, weak, and reliant on the people in charge of the state. It's a very simple principle. It's why the Maoist government went after Tibetan monks. Anyone who sincerely believes in God is a threat. And that is the measure of a free country in the end. Are you allowed to believe that there's an authority higher than the people in charge of your government? That has always been the hallmark of America, religious liberty. So teachers in this country are losing their jobs for trying to protect their children from efforts to sexualize them. In the Drupa School District in California, teachers are prohibited from telling parents when their children are, quote, transitioning to another gender. So your kid could be getting castrated, or chemically or physically, and you're not allowed to know that. Jessica Tapia teaches in that district. She refused to comply with the policy. She said it violated her Christian beliefs as well as her basic responsibilities as a teacher, so she was fired for that. She's brave enough to join us now, along with her attorney, Brad Dacus. Thank you both very much for coming on. Jessica, first to you, I assume the other teachers in your district complied with this grotesque order. Why did you not?
Great question, Tucker. I'm truly afraid that many other teachers don't even know they're under these directives. I didn't know I was under these directives until I found out. And when I found out from my school district that I was under these directives, I chose to speak up about them and stand my ground and stand in my faith and beliefs. And that's when they said that's going to be an issue. You have to comply with these directives or your job is on the line. And so I chose God. I chose to stick with my Christian faith. And because of that, they released me from employment because, in their words, they could not accommodate my religious beliefs.
But I mean, you were also, and bless you for doing that, and you should do that, but you were also siding with parents, all of whom, no matter who they voted for in the last election, you'd think would want to know if their children are being castrated, like their children. Don't you think parents want to know?
Yes, I think parents have the right to know everything about their children, and I will not partake in withholding any information from a parent. I'm a parent myself, and I would be very upset about that. So this fight is not just for the sake of my job loss. This fight is for the protection of all children. This fight is for the preservation of parental rights.
Well, amen. But Brad, is this, since you're the attorney here, is it legal to fire someone for refusing to hide essential facts from parents who are the guardians of these children?
Yeah, this is a clear breach of public trust, and it's a clear violation of her Title VII rights. She was fired not because of the job she did, Tucker. She was fired because of her religious beliefs. And mind you, she's not alone. We at Pacific Justice Institute, we're representing hundreds of people, employees who are fired because of their faith. And the issue is also one of the parents. They're scared, Tucker. Right now, they see all of what's going on. They're horrified by it. And it's for that reason, on our website, we've developed customized opt-out forms for all 50 states where parents for free can download opt-out forms, start learning what their rights are, as well as the material that's being given to the kids and their grandkids throughout the country in public schools.
I mean, Jessica, I have to ask, were there, and I know the answer I want to hear, were there teachers you work with who came up to you and congratulated you for your bravery, I hope?
You know, Tucker, I'm being totally overwhelmed in the best way possible with hundreds of teachers reaching out to me, telling me that they're ready to die on this hill with me, that they completely align with my views on this, that they are ready to stand up to this beast with me and stand for the protection of children and stand for parental rights and, you know, stand for the fact of the matter that as Christians, we can also be in the public sector. And at this point, I feel that I was told you need to choose one or the other. Do you want to be a public school teacher or do you want to continue practicing your Christian faith?
Well, good for you. We're always mean to teachers, but I married one, and I know there are a lot of wonderful teachers, and you're obviously one of them. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Tucker.
So much.
At the beginning, he joins us tonight for a recap. Hey, Trace.
And Tucker, it's about as fast a verdict as I've ever seen. The jury of 8 women and 4 men deliberated for just under 3 hours. And usually when you have 76 witnesses, it takes several hours just to review the testimony. So a quick verdict is often beneficial to the defendant, but not this time. And remember, Alec Murdaugh's defense was basically, yes, I'm a liar. yes, I'm a crook, yes, I'm a drug addict, but I'm not a killer. Most attorneys we spoke with during the trial say Alec Murdaugh's biggest hurdle was cell phone video where you could hear Alec Murdaugh's voice proving that he was in the kennel, that's the scene of the crime, just moments before the killings happened. Murdaugh told investigators that he was not in the kennel. But after being caught red-handed on tape, he later testified that he lied about not being in the kennel because his drug habit had left him paranoid. Murdaugh wanted the jury to believe he left the kennel, went to his house, did not hear any gunshots, returned to the kennel, and found the bodies of his wife and son. He also testified that he held their bodies, despite having no blood evidence on his clothing. It's notable the murder weapons were never found in this case, so it was impossible to connect Murdaugh to any of the weapons, and there was little, if any, forensic evidence implicating Murdaugh. But the circumstantial evidence, as you heard, was robust. In fact, the lead prosecutor moments ago in that news conference that's now over says they knew if they had a chance to put on their case that truth would prevail. And it's important to remember Alec Murdaugh testified in his own defense. Most analysts thought he was a very effective witness. The jury clearly did not share that opinion. Tucker.
Amazing. Very sad story. Trish Gallagher, thank you for that. Yep. So as you just heard, prosecutors did hold a press conference very recently when prosecutors spoke about the victims in this crime. Here's part of it.
Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for every other kind. I kind of want to adopt that and say we may have the worst criminal justice system in the world, but it's better than every other kind that there is. And our criminal justice system worked tonight. It gave a voice to Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, who were brutally mowed down and murdered on the night of June 7th, 2021 by someone that they loved and someone that they trusted. And they couldn't be here to testify for themselves tonight. Their testimony came through the evidence and the information that was gathered by the men and women of the agencies I just mentioned. It came from the testimony of the agents and the investigators and the attorneys and the folks in our staff who were able to get it to the court record. And so I want to say tonight, their voice was heard tonight and justice was brought for them. We can't bring them back, but we can bring them justice.
Judge Jane Pirro is co-host of The Five, has also been following this case, and we're happy to have her join us tonight. Judge, thanks so much for coming on. What's your takeaway from this very, very sad and ugly saga?
Well, I followed this case from the beginning. There were something like 28 days of testimony. It was a span of about 6 weeks. Incredibly fast verdict, especially in a case that's circumstantial. But all murder cases, essentially, because the victim isn't going to come back and say, he killed me, or unless there's a video or an eyewitness, they are all circumstantial. This family was from one of the wealthiest, most successful, legendary family in that county in South Carolina. This defendant was arrogant enough to think that he could take the stand and convince the jury that, yes, I took pills and I was a drug addict and I stole from people, a quadriplegic and young women and my housekeeper and all that other stuff, but I didn't kill my wife and son. And okay, maybe you can buy that. But the problem is that he lied until he was mandated to admit as a result of a Snapchat video that was released not that long ago that had his voice at the scene of the crime within minutes of the crime. And it was curious to me why, Tucker, the defense wanted to take the jury to the scene of the crime. If anything, by the defense taking the jury there, they were able to assess how far the house was where the defendant said, I was taking a nap, is sleeping, and I didn't hear any gunshot wounds, to the distance at the kennels where you would have heard the gunshot wounds. So that was kind of bizarre, but I think his taking the stand was bizarre. Everyone agreed he was a good witness, but he was too slick, because in the end, the jury bought none of this. The judge did not even offer the jury dinner. He said, you've got beverages, soda, chips, and, cookies or whatever. The judge eventually said there was an overwhelming evidence of guilt here after the jury returned the verdict.
May I ask you a question? You said he was slick, he was very good as a witness. This guy's an ambulance chaser, right? Isn't he a slip and fall lawyer who's used to arguing cases?
He is an excellent attorney. And that's what people
Well, I meant that as an insult.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But look, he was an attorney with a huge law firm that made a lot of money. He made a lot of money. He spent a lot of it on drugs and just stealing. He just kept stealing to the next level. But this case came down, Tucker, to the classic motive, means, and opportunity. The shell casings, although they never found the guns, were consistent on the property, a 1,700-acre property, as the shell casings from the weapon that killed Maggie, the wife. And the kind of gun that was used was his favorite kind of gun. So what you had here was a guy who had a wife who was speaking to a matrimonial attorney, a son that he called a little detective. Very important. He said, we have to talk to you about the pills. They were coming on to him strong that he was using opioids. And then we hear that at the scene of the crime, the dogs are not barking. So at the time, within minutes of the crime, there's nobody who's coming around who's a stranger cropping up on them and shooting the wife and son. This is a classic domestic violence case.
Wait, but can I ask, is this, you've been in the law a long time, is this common behavior for personal injury attorneys? Would you, I mean, not to generalize, but would you say?
Oh, well, I don't know any personal injury attorneys who killed somebody, but you know what I do know is that they're theatrical. To them, the courtroom is theater. And this guy thought he controlled the theater. And my understanding is that Harpootlian, the very well respected and regarded defense attorney, didn't want him to take the stand. But the defendant makes the ultimate decision himself. The saddest part of this is that this is your classic domestic violence case. Husband kills his wife and his son, thinks that everybody is going to buy this, you know, oh, poor me, poor me. And in the end, they saw him for what he was, a drug-addicted, thieving, conniving, lying, now a double murderer.
Amazing. What a sad story. I appreciate your analysis of it. Thank you. Judge Janine Pirro, the best. Thank you. I mean, like, what? Women, don't worry, we're not replacing you. Don't worry, everything's cool. Chadwick Morris with The Spectator. He joins us tonight. Chadwick, I have so many questions for you, but one of them, like, where do we make up all these jobs? The economy's degrading, and this dude has found a job dressing like a woman, wearing a nose ring, and then he's gotten hired by Hershey's? Like, is there a major for that in college? Like, where do these jobs come from?
Well, first of all, happy International Women's Awareness Month, or whatever it is right now. We all like a little nuts in our chocolate. I don't see what the big deal is. I love nuts in my chocolate, so I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's a real tragic start to Women's History Awareness Month that this shop teacher, who I think we all agree is delicate and as lovely and temperate as a summer's day, really, is under investigation for maybe not being really trans. When did we start questioning people's identity like this? She also, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but aside from being transgender, she's also disabled. She suffers from gigantomastia, which is an unusual swelling of the breast tissue. In her case, it's prosthetic breasts, which have apparently become sentient and swelling on their own. So, this is just how it is now. If you say you're a woman, that's how it is, and women seem to be okay with it because very few are speaking up and being loud about being erased in this way and taken over by men in dresses. And
Talk about mansplaining, though. I mean, isn't this the ultimate mansplaining? I'm a woman now. You shut up, ladies. And they're like, okay, I'll shut up. If some dude dressed like a woman tells me what it's really like to be a woman, I guess I can't say anything. Like, what?
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't want to get knocked down and bruised by those prosthetic breasts. I wouldn't challenge that guy either.
You know what? That's a very good point. Chadwick Moore, common sense intrudes. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So the defenders of democracy are out defending democracy again. They're telling you it's really, really dangerous, and anyone would get to see the thousands of hours of surveillance footage from January 6th, which has been hidden from the public for 2 years, as a tiny group of people gets to make up stories about what happened that day and change the country on the basis of those stories. And we respectfully disagree. We think people should, in a democracy, be allowed to see what their government is doing and get as much evidence as they can. And it turns out the public agrees. Rasmussen, the polling firm, just found that 80% of American voters believe it's important that the public should be allowed to see the videos from January 6th. That would include 86% of Republicans, okay, but it would also include 78% of Democrats, 78% and 75% of independents. Wow. So you're defending democracy, but you're denying people information on the basis of which they can make their own decisions. How does that work exactly? Well, it's not democracy, of course. It's building a bulwark against your lies being revealed. And they are lying. And we know that because we've been looking at the tape. We're going to bring you information on the tape and some of it next week. And we think it's going to be really, really interesting. Winston Marshall played lead guitar and banjo for the band Mumford & Sons, which became internationally famous and successful, and for good reason. They're great. Then he made the mistake of mildly praising a book about Antifa writers that he read written by Andy Ngo. And his life just changed in an instant. He became a political figure he didn't want to be. And ultimately, he was attacked so harshly he had to leave the band. So we thought it'd be interesting to spend an hour with him, and we just did for a brand new episode of Tucker Carlson today. He's a pretty amazing person, actually, we discovered. Here's part of our conversation.
The music industry and the creative industries more broadly was, it was the black squares on social media. And if you remember, there were a lot of actors and actresses fronting money to bail out the various rioters, and there was a big social media campaign to raise money here, and they were bailing out those who were arrested in the 2020 riots. And so that's actually the atmosphere, and I guess that's perhaps why what happened to me is because it was so contrary to the prevailing politics, I guess, of the creative industries. So I had very few followers, by the way. I think about 3,000 followers on Twitter. Somehow, this book, and it honestly feels like an act of God, which I know that sounds a bit crazy, but it
doesn't. For the record, it doesn't sound crazy at all.
My life sort of started to crumble. Initially, I was like, so what, it'll pass. But that's when you get the sort of phone calls from loved ones and friends and people you work with just panicking. And this dog pile actually became almost real-life dog pile of just everyone in my life around me. And
what was their complaint?
Well, I guess the people I were working with, they were getting attacked by these Antifa, maybe not quite as much as me, but they were, they were getting harassed by these people as well. And they're very effective online. Like, for example, there was a whole night where they were changing my Wikipedia page from Winston Marshall is a banjo player to Winston Marshall is a fascist. And it was just, I had another friend trying to change it back, and they were just all night like at it. And they just swarm you like hornets in everything they do to try and destroy you.
If you wind up with a society that cannot tolerate a man like Winston Marshall, who is rational, reasonable, decent, that's a problem. That's on you, not on Winston Marshall. That whole conversation is on Fox Nation right now. Well worth it. So evidence emerges that a prominent House Democrat has direct ties to Chinese intelligence. But if you notice it, guess what you are? You're a racist! Great story. After the break. Judy Chu is a member of Congress from the state of California. Not super famous. We didn't know much about her. But then we saw a Daily Caller piece that had multiple photographs showing Judy Chu, member of Congress, accepting honorary appointments at two groups linked directly to Chinese intelligence. That's a huge problem. So this weekend, Congressman Lance Gooden of Texas suggested that maybe Judy Chu shouldn't have a security clearance. Maybe she should explain what she was doing with Chinese intelligence. That's not crazy. But of course, it caused a complete meltdown in the media. You're a racist! All right. Ying Ma is the author of the book Chinese Girl in the Ghetto, which is excellent, by the way. She joins us tonight to assess all of this. Ying Ma, thank you so much for coming on. So I don't really know what this has to do with race, but I can't help notice that when the pandemic first started, the Chinese government accused anybody who thought maybe it came from the Wuhan lab of racism. So I'm seeing kind of a playbook here.
Oh, yes, definitely. Now, I should say that no one should have her loyalty to America questioned based on race, but nobody should be able to cry racism in order to circumvent legitimate scrutiny of very troubling ties to communist China, especially to the Chinese Communist Party's front organizations here in the U.S. Now, Judy Chu has a habit of crying racism, not only regarding her own affiliations with these very disturbing groups, but also to thwart legitimate inquiry from Congress, as well as efforts to counter the Chinese threat. She in fact successfully stopped a Democratic colleague from joining a Republican effort to condemn China's role in spreading COVID in the early days of the pandemic. And she also opposed the recent creation of that very bipartisan Select Committee on China for the purpose of countering the Chinese threat from the Communist Party in China. So this kind of politics is poisonous. My organization, the American Ideals PAC, we were formed precisely to counter this type of politics. If you guys agree with that, find us, support us at AmericanIdealsPAC.com, AmericanIdealsPAC.com. The point of it all is that when people do this kind of race baiting, they're not even telling the truth. Judy Chu claims that whenever you criticize China this way, you're fanning anti-Asian violence and anti-Asian sentiments. But she is the last person who will tell you that many of these very gruesome physical attacks we've seen against Asians in this country are perpetrated by non-whites, not by white supremacists. These are people who are reluctant to say that. All they want to say is that Trump is at fault and Republicans are at fault.
She's a shill for China, obviously, and she's hiding it. Yingma, great to see you tonight. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Happy Monday. The dominant rumor on the internet over the weekend was that Donald Trump will soon be indicted, possibly even handcuffed on camera. Is that true? We can't say. We do know that Trump is the subject of a grand jury investigation in Manhattan. That's a city that voted against Donald Trump by almost 80% in the last presidential election. We also know that the grand jury was impaneled by a Soros-funded DA called Alvin Bragg, who looks and acts like a Tawana Brawley-era Al Sharpton. So we would assume, on the basis of that evidence, that it's pretty likely Trump does get charged with something at some point. But charged with what? That's the question that should matter. In a free country, laws are universal. Laws apply to all citizens equally, precisely because all citizens are considered equal. For generations, this was very obvious to American liberals. In fact, it was the basis of their worldview. That was back when liberals opposed Jim Crow and were not trying to reinstate it as something called equity. We are not liberals, but we retain the traditional American view, which is that laws must be applied equally, or else they're not laws at all. Justice must be blind, or else it is tyranny. So we spent the day with the help of a lawyer on our staff trying to assess the likely charges against Donald Trump. And here's what we found. 8 years ago, as he was running for president, Trump paid a porn actress called Stormy Daniels $130,000. Daniels alleged that she and Trump had at one point had sex. Trump denied that. He still denies it. But in exchange for promising not to repeat that claim in public, Trump, through his then attorney, Michael Cohen, sent Stormy Daniels a check. Was that legal? Well, we can answer that question. Because there was a campaign in progress at the time, officials at the Federal Election Commission later examined the transaction between Trump and Stormy Daniels. Federal investigators concluded that nothing criminal had taken place. And in fact, settlements like this, whatever you think of them, are common, both among famous people, celebrities, and in corporate America. The result is usually known as an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. In this case, you can believe whatever side you want to believe, but paying people not to talk about things, hush money, is ordinary in modern America. According to the FEC, there was no need for Donald Trump to report his payments to Stormy Daniels, nor was the money that he sent her through his attorney subject to campaign finance limitations. The FEC determined the entire thing was a personal expenditure. It clearly was. So what is the crime here? Well, the media don't seem very interested in finding out. This is Donald Trump. He's a criminal. Everything he does is a crime. Watch.
Simply because he may have committed worse crimes, you don't let him off of lesser crimes. If you are, for example, seeking a prosecution for murder, if the guy gets caught drunk driving in another context before that, you don't just let him go because you have bigger fish to fry.
Nobody is above the law, including Donald Trump. It doesn't matter that this is kind of a minor crime compared to some of the other allegations.
A crime is a crime is a crime is a crime. That's what anybody prosecuting or a judge would say.
A crime is a crime is a crime, as Mika said. An indictment is an indictment is an indictment. When I hear people saying this is much ado about nothing, I think about all the members of Congress I served with and understanding every single one of them would have been charged and sent to jail had they done this.
I was reading the Bible, which said that a man sows, that he may also reap.
Joe Scarborough, ladies and gentlemen, telling us what a crime is. A crime with a woman. Okay. There's Al Sharpton lecturing us about the Bible. It's hilarious. Oh, the hypocrisy. But it didn't really answer the question. Why are we handcuffing Donald Trump? Liberals don't seem to care at all as long as it happens, as long as Trump gets handcuffed. But in fact, there's plenty of evidence that Trump committed no crime in sending money to Stormy Daniels. We don't have to guess. Consider the case of former North Carolina Senator John Edwards. Edwards was often described as a fiery liberal, but in fact he was a populist. He ran for president twice, and in the process infuriated the leaders of the Democratic Party by talking way too much about income inequality. They really hated him for that. Long after Edwards left office, Barack Obama's DOJ charged him with federal finance violations. So the premise of the case against John Edwards was that he had received $1 million in gifts and that he spent that money in hush money payments to his mistress, with whom he later had a child. Obama's DOJ argued that the money that Edwards sent to his girlfriend amounted to campaign contributions. Edwards never reported that money, so Obama's DOJ tried to send him to prison. Well, in the end, the case fell apart under the weight of its own incoherence. So Obama's lawyers argued that any payment that could conceivably help a political candidate politically is by definition a campaign expenditure. There's no law that says that, by the way, they just made it up. But if you think about it for a second, it doesn't make sense. If that were true, flip it around. It would mean that candidates could use donor money and also taxpayer money in the form of federal matching funds to pay for any personal expense as long as that expense could conceivably benefit them politically. So candidates could take federal matching funds, tax dollars, to buy Ferraris as long as they argued those Ferraris would appear in campaign ads, et cetera, et cetera. It's nonsensical. So not surprisingly, John Edwards was acquitted in that case. It was a humiliating defeat for the Obama administration, but it also sent a clear message and set a precedent, which Alvin Bragg apparently is ignoring. So we don't know that an indictment's coming, as noted, and if it does come, we're not sure what it's going to say. We haven't seen it. But if Trump is indicted for sending money to Stormy Daniels, well, you'll be watching the abuse of law enforcement power. Oh, but you can't complain about it. Because as Congresswoman Maxine Waters has explained, political protests staged on behalf of Donald Trump are not constitutionally protected. They're domestic terrorism. Watch.
This is Donald Trump sending messages out to domestic terrorists that he's worked with and he helped to organize for the invasion of the Capitol on January 5th. He's sending out a message to them to get ready to protest any arrests, indictments, etc. that he may have. So he's basically talking to the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, QAnon, KKK.
Oh, January 6th. The only really organized group on January 6th was the FBI, of course. But consider the idea and where it's coming from. This is Maxine Waters. This is the lady who cheered on the LA race riots 3 decades ago. This is the very same person who just a few years ago said, and we're quoting, if you see anybody from the Trump cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, she's very old, get out and create a crowd. And you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. Basically necklace them. Okay, Maxine Waters. But she's a Democrat, so this is just a civil rights exercise. She's protected from domestic terrorism charges. And Alvin Bragg is too. He's a Democrat. And you should know, we don't want to impugn his character or anything. We don't want to suggest that there's a connection between politics and the indictment of Donald Trump. But Alvin Bragg did run for office promising, as a campaign promise, to indict Donald Trump. We're not guessing. He gave televised interviews about it. Watch.
All right, so newspaper reports today say we could expect to see an indictment to be handed down against Donald Trump soon. Any thoughts on how you would handle such a high-profile case?
Certainly throughout my career, I've gone wherever the facts have taken me. And the types of allegations that have been reported publicly, valuation of assets, perhaps the use of shell companies, tax fraud. I've done all these sort of cases. I've tried a mortgage fraud case. I've tried one of the most significant money laundering cases out in the New York region. So of all the candidates, I sort of stand at the ready with all the tools in the toolkit.
Yeah, we're going to go after Trump. And by the way, he listed some real crimes there, and they have spent years trying to pin those crimes on Trump. They even got his tax returns illegally, and they found none of them. Not an offense of Trump, just true. So we wind up with this, which is piddling. But what's interesting is even as Bragg has been single-mindedly focused, Bragg, a graduate of Harvard College, on Donald Trump and his crimes, sending money to a porn star, he has been not only ignoring real crimes, but downgrading felonies to misdemeanors and letting actual violent criminals out of jail as quickly as possible. On his first day in office, Bragg, consistent with the ideas of the man who paid for his campaign, George Soros, issued a memo explaining his office will, quote, not seek a carceral sentence except in cases involving homicides, economic crimes, and a small number of felonies. Now, that was great news for people who commit violent felonies, including rapists like Justin Washington. Washington struck a deal with Bragg that allowed him to serve just 30 days in jail under the theory that his rape was really just second-degree coercion. So he got out quickly, and when he did, police say this same man sexually attacked 5 other people in the Bronx. He even tried to rape a homeless woman at 10 in the morning. Okay. So in another case, a career criminal who was arrested 3 times in 4 months for serious crimes, including assault and aggravated harassment, skipped court. And when police finally found him and hauled him to court, Bragg's office let him go in January of last year. What's interesting is that no one cares. Where's Joe Scarborough in that? Is he upset about it? Is his wife upset? Power to women. Right. All the arch feminists who should be out there defending women, they don't care at all. So here you have a DA who treats violent felonies like they're misdemeanors, even when it gets people killed, who's unleashing criminals on the population, but then spending all of his time trying to destroy his political opponents. In this case, elevating a misdemeanor charge to a felony for the purpose of taking down Trump. Now, here's what we think, if there is an indictment, will form the core of the charge. Bragg seems to be alleging that Trump violated New York's Business Record Act by falsely reporting the payout to Stormy Daniels as, quote, legal fees. Now, if this were true, it would constitute a misdemeanor, and the statute of limitations has already run out for that, for the bookkeeping error, assuming it even happened. But Bragg apparently is thinking about charging Trump under a felony version of the business records laws, one that punishes businesses for falsifying records as a way to commit another separate crime. That would be the campaign finance violation, which, as we mentioned, was not a campaign finance violation, and we know that from the FEC, which polices campaign finance violations. And by the way, if it were, then that would be a federal crime, not something that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, would be prosecuting. The whole thing doesn't make any sense at all. On a legal level, on a political level, it does, because Trump is running for president. So what's behind this? Is he acting alone? We may soon find out. Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, who sits in the House Judiciary Committee, is calling on Bragg to testify before the Congress. He wants to hear Bragg explain whether or not he's had any contact with the White House or the Biden DOJ. And if he has, maybe that will explain these charges. He also wants to know whether this prosecution will use any federal funds. Let's hope Alvin Bragg, who is committed to the rule of law, complies or is forced to comply very soon. But no matter what happens, if this indictment arrives, no matter who you voted for or plan on voting for, make no mistake, this is a turning point for the country. Now, the headline here is not that they're being unfair to Donald Trump again, though of course they are, or even that Trump is the former president of the United States. Who cares? I mean, though as long as we are indicting retired presidents, where are the charges against George W. Bush for invading Iraq under false pretenses and giving permanent normalized trade relations to China, which completely wrecked our economy? Where are those charges? Don't hold your breath. In Washington, wrecking your own country is not considered a crime. And of course, George W. Bush knows that well, which is why he doesn't seem worried at all. Criticizing the ruling class, that's what they indict you for. But either way, Donald Trump's former job as president of the United States is not really the point here. Yes, of course you can indict former presidents if they've done something wrong. That's not what this is about. The headline here is that there is, as noted, a presidential race in progress right now. And if you check the polls, you will find that Trump is leading the Republican field. That's the unprecedented thing. Taking out your opponent using the justice system. If the Democratic Party is allowed to do this, allowed to crush the presidential frontrunner, the main threat to their power, with a bogus criminal case, where does that leave us? We're done. Because that precedent will live forever. And voters will never again determine the outcome of a presidential election. It's remarkable when you think about it. So after all the yelling from permanent Washington about January 6th and how it was a threat to our democratic norms and the peaceful transfer of power, they've decided to completely short-circuit our democratic norms, not to mention the peaceful transfer of power, using the courts and prosecutors. What happens if they get away with this? No one seems to be thinking this through. Everyone's all spun up. But what happens if they get away with this? If they use the Justice Department, in full view of everyone, to settle a political score and to keep the White House, just to take a guy out of the race who seems to be doing fairly well? We'll destroy the justice system. And that's not a small thing. A functioning justice system has kept this country peaceful for hundreds of years. The purpose of a justice system is to administer justice so that citizens don't have to do it themselves. You outsource that duty to the government. But what happens when you take that away? When there is no justice system? What happens when the Department of Justice decides that its goal is not justice, but protecting the ruling class at all costs? Think about that. People are still going to demand justice. The desire for justice is an inherent human desire. We are born with it. But if there's no neutral place to do it, some people will decide they're going to have to do it themselves. Ooh. Now, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we can say for certain it's going to be really ugly. So they hate Donald Trump. Fine. But they don't get to destroy America's justice system because they do. We would never recover from that. Robert Costello was legal advisor to former Trump attorney Michael Cohen, who made the payment to Stormy Daniels. He joins us tonight. Mr. Costello, thank you so much for coming on. So, as noted, we can't know whether there'll be an indictment or what's in it. But from the leaks that you have read in, say, the New York Times, how do you assess this case?
Weak, to say the least. I just spent 2 hours or so testifying before the grand jury in downtown Manhattan, and I got my point across, although it was clear to me that the Manhattan DA's office did not want to get to the truth. I need to explain that a little bit. I called them up after I saw Michael Cohen on TV stating things that he said he was going to tell the grand jury and had told the grand jury that were contrary to what he told us when we first represented him in April of 2018. So I'm sitting at home watching these lies, and I said, I've got to do something about it. I don't represent Donald Trump, but I do stand for justice, and I think I have a legal obligation to inform both sides. So that's what I did. I had a ton of documents that I had prepared back in 2019 for the Department of Justice. The U.S. Attorney's Office called me up and said, Mr. Costello, we would like to talk to you about your representation of Michael Cohen. I laughed and said, can I presume you have a waiver of the attorney-client privilege? And they said, you presume correctly. I said, fine, send it over. I'll be delighted to talk to you. That waiver is very clear. And once we had that, I prepared 330 emails, a bunch of text messages. I prepared a contemporaneous report of our first meeting with Michael Cohen at the Regency Hotel in Manhattan, as well as a contemporaneous notes of the interview I had for 2 hours with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, as well as contemporaneous notes of an interview by the House Committee on Intelligence, who sent 3 investigators to my office, one of whom is now Dan Goldman, a congressman here in New York. So I had all of this material ready. I sent it to Donald Trump's lawyer, and I sent it to the Manhattan DA's office. And I contacted the Manhattan DA's office, and I asked could we meet with Alvin Bragg? Because I wanted to present this to Alvin Bragg as I had presented it to the Southern District. I wanted him to look me in the eye and assess my credibility. Did I have more credibility than Michael Cohen? Because Michael Cohen, in my opinion, was lying about just about everything. I specifically told them that there were two main points that I wanted to make clear. That Cohen had told us that when we first met him, that he was suicidal. Why is that important? Because when you're suicidal, thinking that that's the only way out of your legal mess, and you're presented with the following options, that you can cooperate against Donald Trump and provide information that would get you a get-out-of-jail-free card, and you respond to us, I do not have any information on Donald Trump. And he said it many times during that 2-hour meeting. I swear to God, Bob, I don't have anything on Donald Trump. And I had my law partner who knew Michael Cohen for 10 years on Columbia Grammar and Prep School here in Manhattan, because Cohen was on the board of directors.
Yeah.
And when I heard him say that he was suicidal the weekend before, standing on the roof of the Regency Hotel, I didn't know whether he was a drama queen or telling the truth. So I looked at my partner, and he shook his head and nodded, I think he's telling the truth. And later on, we got that corroborated by the Reverend Jerry Falwell and his wife, who had dinner with Michael Cohen, who told him the same thing. Why is that important? Because when you're willing to give up your life in order to avoid these legal troubles, when they're insurmountable to you, and you're offered a way out, so all you have to do is cooperate on Donald Trump. Do you have anything on Donald Trump? And he says no repeatedly. I swear to God, Bob, I don't have anything. Then you know that you've got a guy who probably doesn't have anything. It's certainly easier to give up information on Donald Trump than it is to kill yourself. On top of that, while he's making these speeches during 2-hour period, he's marching up and down on the other side of the conference table like a tiger in the zoo, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. He looked like he hadn't slept in 5 days. He looked like somebody who was suicidal. And every once in a while, he would stop and point at us. And when I say once in a while, he did this at least 20 times and said, guys, I want you to know, I will do whatever the F I have to do. I will never spend 1 day in jail. Now, what he's saying is, I'll lie, cheat, steal, shoot somebody. I will not spend a day in jail. Do you think a guy whose mentality is that is going to not admit that he has information on Donald Trump? But having said that, the DA's office didn't ask me questions to bring that up. And I brought it up anyway. I ignored their questions and simply gave them the information. I'm hearing rap in my ear, left and right. I'll continue if you want, but
let me just ask you one final question, if it's okay, Mr. Cassell.
Sure.
If you were the DA, if you were a prosecutor and you were trying to be fair and honest and serve the law rather than a political agenda, you'd want to know that, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And I told them and told the grand jury today, I was deputy chief of the criminal division of the U.S. attorneys for the Southern District. I said I wouldn't touch a witness like Michael Cohen for any amount of money. You simply cannot rely upon this guy. And tonight, he was on another station denying that he waived the attorney-client privilege. Here it is, in writing, and that's his signature on the second page. So
that's unbelievable.
I guess he didn't know that, and the district attorney didn't know that. And I told them, Michael Cohen has been in your office 20 times and twice in the grand jury, and he forgot to tell you that he waived the attorney-client privilege 22 times? I mean, really, is this the kind of witness you want to ride to the finish line? Not in my book.
I think all they care about is the finish line. But I sure appreciate
Exactly.
the information that you brought us tonight.
You're
Robert
quite
Cassell,
welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.